presentation shared. Can you see that one all right?
Not yet, we can't.
Oh, it helps if I actually hit the share button.
Yep, there you go, perfect.
Fab. You can see just the full screen slide and not my notes. So
yeah,
you can see all the crib stuff. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for having me. This is great. So my name is Marc Burrage. I am a project development director at Creative Assembly. My talk today is going to be on practical application of Agile values in game development. So the main reason why I've picked this as a topic is Agile is something that gets talked about theoretically and in textbook fashion quite a lot. You hear a lot of buzzwords. But the reality of how you actually implement it can be quite different. So I thought it'd be useful to share just some practical advice and the experience that I've had in actually putting it into effect. Okay. So just a little bit of background on me. I've been in the games industry for just over 3 years now. I primarily spent my time on Total War Arena, which is our free-to-play game here at Creative Assembly. And my background before that, I spent about 10 years as a technical project manager, working with people like Virgin Atlantic, Specsavers, WWF, doing a lot of bespoke software and web tech for those businesses. So a little bit about Total War Arena, because that's the main product that we run in an agile fashion at Creative Assembly. It's a free-to-play game. It's currently live in China. It's a 10v10 strategy online multiplayer where you get to pick a different commander from history. You pick 3 units to take onto the battlefield, and then you fight it out to either capture waypoints or to have the most control at the end of the battle, or to capture your enemy's base. So why did we look at Agile in the first place? So just a little bit of background. As with a lot of AAA game development, we tend to use Waterfall to plan out our schedule for the tent poles, because a lot of what we do is replicated between projects. We've been making Total War games for over 20 years now. So we've got a lot of experience in how we're sort of putting them together and the methods that make the most sense. But with a live game, we need to be able to react more to the community. We need to be able to react in terms of what sort of content we wanted to put out there. And we decided that Scrum in particular was a better fit for us for that sort of approach. And our game teams at the time mostly comprised of single discipline, and we wanted to have cross-discipline teams who could create features and content from start to finish. So that is where we got to. So just to give you a bit of background on the team structure that we have on Arena. So the team size compared to what was going on with some of the tent poles was much smaller, so we had to kind of boil it down to a really slick, fast-paced unit that was able to handle everything in a smaller fashion than we were used to. But we still have a game director who also acts as the product owner or the product manager. We have the development director, which is myself. We've got a tech director, an art director, and a QA lead, and they all act as the pinnacles of each of those disciplines. The game director also handles all of the designers on the team. So we created feature teams and different types of teams in order to be able to focus specifically on different bits of the game that we wanted to create. So a typical feature team would have a lead designer who would be called the story owner, a development manager, and then to have designers, primarily UI artists and coders, client coders, and QA embedded within them. That's a key point you'll see throughout all of these teams. Unlike a lot of game teams who will do QA towards the end as a separate thing, we wanted to make sure that our definition of done for each of the things we were working on was always tested. And then the only QA that needed to happen at the end of that was integration when you're putting it into the rest of the game. So we had the feature teams who'd be handling new features, development of features, things like daily missions or a new battle type. We then had content teams. So one of the unique things about Arena was, unlike the mainline Total War games, which focused on a particular period in history, we had gladiators, we've got Persians, we've got Romans, we've got all these different historical people games that we can take things from, and we would create those factions, and we create new levels, and we create new units. So those teams were a lot more art focused. So we have lots of different artist types in there, but we still have the same designers, dev managers, and a lead designer to manage all that together. Then quite uniquely for Arena compared to the rest of CA at the time, we had a platform team, because we obviously had a lot of server-side technology going on to run the game. And so that was a very code-heavy team. They would still have, again, designers, but a lot of server coders, a lot of QA to handle any new server-side features that we needed to work on. And they would also link quite closely with our live operations team. So the other three teams, which I've mentioned there, they would be working on planned work, whereas the live ops team would be our main port of call for what do we need to do right now. So if there were any bugs that came in, reported by the community or picked up by our metrics, they would get fed in through the live ops team, and they would then determine, do we need to get a hot fix out? Do we need to address this really, really quickly? Or can this then just be fed back into what the other teams are doing just as part of the next regular patch? And then we also work with central teams at Creative Assembly. So teams like cinematics, graphics, tools, audio, all of those operate as centralized units, and we would then request some of their time. So there are three Agile principles that we want to focus on this talk as to how we got the best out of this project. These are all from a standard list, but the three we're focusing on is business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Build projects around motivated individuals, given the environment support they need, and trust them to get the job done. And the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So there's one additional point I just wanted to pick up on, which is the difference between Agile and Scrum. So this quote from Northeastern University sums it up quite nicely. The key difference between Agile and Scrum is while Agile is a project development management philosophy, which utilizes a core set of values or principles, Scrum is a specific Agile methodology that is used to facilitate the project. So if you hear them, Agile is more that overall mindset, and Scrum is a particularly made format, which you can then utilize however you see fit. So first one I want to cover off, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So in each of these, I've got kind of 3 key points that are useful to take away. First one is multiple sprints, single time frame, 1 release. So we were releasing a patch every 2 weeks. Regardless of all those different teams, they were all coming into that 1 release. So although we had multiple sprints going on for each of the feature teams, the content teams, they were all running at the same time, and they were all aiming for that 1 end point. Now that meant there was a lot of coordination that needed to go on, but it meant that everybody was really clear over this patch happens every 2 weeks. It's not a case of, oh, there's a feature patch going out then, there might be a content patch going out then. There was just this continuity of, we have to make sure that we're pulling this all together in one place. And it just made a really clear plan and mindset for everyone that every other Thursday was just this really key point that we had to get things ready for. We had a Scrum of Scrums for the high-level view of the stories and their status. So every feature team had their daily Scrum, so their daily meeting at the start of every day, where they would outline what they were working on, what they'd done yesterday, and any blockers. But then this Scrum of Scrum meetings was the opportunity for all the leads in all the teams to come together just before lunch and catch up and just have a look at how the patch as a whole was coming along, and if there was any need for things to be shared between the teams, if there was just anything that was needed to be more widely known, and especially you would then get people from marketing, from brand, from community. That's where they kind of get their information from. So rather than having to go around each of the scrums that was happening, there was this one central place where we pulled all that information together. And finally, a physical and a digital version of the board. So we use Jira, Creative Assembly, for all of our issue tracking and development, and all the teams use those for their daily scrums. So we'd pull that board up and they would update their tasks, update the time remaining, things like that. But we still kept a physical version, which we would use for the scrums. So it was a much higher level rather than at the individual tasks handed out to people. We had what we call stories, which were the collections of things, and we would move those physically across the board. So again, rather than having to go around each of the teams and say, I need to know this, I need to know this, I need to know this, you could just go to this board and see this really clear visual representation of how a particular patch was going, because you'd have to do, in progress, blocked, done, and you could just see throughout the course of the 2 weeks things progressing across the board, and it was just a really nice snapshot of where things were going. So the main takeaway from this point is just regular communication and make sure that it works for the people that you've got within the team. Next point I want to cover off: give them the environment support they need and trust them to get the job done. This one's quite specific to people who are interested in production, development management. Jira is a very good tool, but it takes a lot of wrangling in order to get the most out of it. And you've got to make sure that it makes sense for the teams you're working with. So there are tons and tons of Jira fields, and you can turn everything under the sun on, but start having a look at it and seeing what fields are actually being used, start having a look and seeing what reports people are pulling out of it, and strip it down as much as you can, so that especially when people are entering tickets, when people are having to do anything with those tickets, choose the field types carefully, just make it something that is as frictionless as possible, so that you're getting what you need out of it reporting wise, but more importantly, the team are getting what they need out of it in terms of having information about what they need to work on, what it's linked to, when it's due. Filter external information for the consumption of the team. So we would obviously get a lot of feedback from the publisher, we get a lot of feedback from other teams around the business, we get a lot of feedback from community and marketing, and as a producer, as a development manager, you have to be able to figure out what's going to be best for that particular team on any given day. And you know, when you've got different teams of different discipline types, as I said, we had art heavy teams, we had code heavy teams. You know, I don't want to generalize or stereotype, but you will get to know that different types of people like things in different ways. And it's really important that you then present that information to them in a way that's going to be helpful. And facilitate, don't interfere. I'm a strong believer that although you can obviously pull a lot of useful information out of Jira objectively, the best dev managers and producers I've ever met are people who understand the people on their team and how to get the best out of them. And if something is not progressing as quickly as possible, if something has been blocked for a while, if there's a conflict about the team, don't just assume that you can swoop in as a dev manager producer and fix everything by raising your voice or patronizing them. You know, this sounds really obvious, but it happens far more than it should do. You should consider yourself a facilitator. You are somebody who is there to help them complete the work, and not somebody who is just there to make sure they get it done on time. So the headline from all this is supportive facilitation. Figure out how you can help them, because you're not making any of these things, they are. And finally, the best architect requirements and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So this is a kind of carry on from the previous one, but whatever process you bring in, they should run it themselves. They will need some help along the way, but if you are having to drag them throughout it all the time, it's never going to work. You've got to keep reviewing it, revising it, and just figuring out a way that it's comfortable for them and they feel like this is a help towards them producing it. Don't limit Scrum training to just Scrum Master. So obviously Scrum has a lot of preset training options that you can send your team on. Don't just assume that your producer or your product owner should be the ones to go on Scrum Master training. whoever on your team is good at being a cheerleader, is good at being a pragmatic optimist, whoever is going to just motivate people, they can be a Scrum Master. And if it's somebody within the team who's also doing work themselves, all the better, because they're going to be more respected if they're actually contributing towards the tasks, as much as producers would love to be the ones that were most respected on the team. And finally, don't be limited by your predetermined role to facilitate, don't lead. As a carry on of the previous thing, as a Scrum team, one of the core principles is that everybody should be able to help with something. Now, in game development, with the kind of micro level that we go into in terms of specialisms, it's not always possible. It's not as Scrum as we would like it to be. But in terms of facilitating the team organization and in terms of helping out wherever you can, I think it's a really good mindset to get into, that at least as a team, like if you're just being supportive, if you're just saying, can I go and get you a cup of coffee to help with this, that can still bring across the same sort of feelings that you would get on a perfectly run Scrum team. So it's trust and delegation. It's all about just making sure that people feel like they can contribute to the process, even if they don't really know exactly how it's supposed to work. They will have a good feeling for how a team should operate. And that's my talk. I've put a few of my my social links there if anybody's got any further questions. That was a very quick run through, but yeah, let me know if anyone's got any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. We've got like 2 minutes, so I'm going to pick a couple of the questions, and then any of the others, because we've got quite a few, you could just type them out.
Of course.
That's fantastic. So we've got a question here. Would you recommend paying for Scrum and Agile training whilst at university, or would you just wait to learn that when you get to the workforce?
I would wait. I think there's plenty of free resources on the web that you can get a really good grounding of it. It's something that does get a bit waffly and a bit textbooky if you try to put too much investment in it, and every business will run it differently. The best Scrum training I've been on has been with the people I'm actually employed to work with, and it changes every single time. So you want to do it as a team.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense, because if everyone else is learning exactly the same as you, then you're all doing the same thing, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So actually, you just touched on that a little bit there, but someone's mentioned if you've got any recommended reading materials on the kind of.
Not really, because it changes so often. It's one of these really fluid things. I would just Google it. I know it sounds really ridiculous, but have a look at what are the most recently published things, because Scrum in itself is a thing that is evolving. It's what it's meant to do, and something that I read a couple of years ago may not still be as relevant and useful as it is now. So just keep up to date with things that are out there, and it should be something that you try and make sure that it fits for how you're working. Don't think like just because there's this really well recognized textbook or article out there and you're like, but that isn't exactly fitting for how we want our team to operate. That's fine. Your gut instinct is probably right, and go with it, and your team will tell you if it's not working.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Honestly, Marc, that's great. Thanks for answering those questions. There are quite a few others. There's about 9 of them in there.
Cool. Yeah, I will.
If you could touch on those, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.